Okay, so we're going to take a look at another faction now, and it's going to be Harad and Umbar. So I'll set up a battle and then we'll go through their roster and then we'll see them in action. Okay, so Harad and Umbar, they are of course just listed as Harad, but Umbar units are to be found here for the time being. Starting off with their lower tier units, the Corsairs, of course, they return from vanilla, and they are really, the lower tier units are very much going to be punished in this mod if they are put up against higher tier units, more so than they were in vanilla. So the Corsairs, they're not likely to be terribly useful as anything other than cannon fodder, which is fine. Most lower tier units are going to fulfill that role. But the Corsairs, their attack and defense score is slightly better than some of the Orc units, but ultimately they are just lower tier units, and they can't form any formations because they're not a spear militia unit like some of the good Kingdoms of Men have, but nonetheless they do have a slightly better attack score than them, so perhaps these are pretty good cannon fodder to put up on walls and such in sieges. There are also the Corsair Pikemen. Now the Corsair Pikemen are actually a pretty decent unit for what they are, mainly because cheap pikes, as I've said before, can be very useful provided you keep them in formation, keep them in guard mode and have them tie down a choke point. And these guys are no exception to that, although of course because they are lower tier pikes, they are pretty cheap. They will have even more of a weakness to arrows. They don't really have armor as such, but they do have some decent additional things as well, like a combat bonus in deserts. That's not bad. And they also have good stamina, so not a bad unit for what the price is, to be honest with you. Another returning unit is the Hashari. Now, the Hashari are actually a higher tier unit now. They are in amongst the lower tier units for some reason, but nonetheless, they have a very high attack score. They are a damage dealing unit. They aren't particularly tough in melee, though it must be said, and there aren't very many of them. They are well armored, but ultimately how few of them there are means they will start to fall relatively quickly. They do cause fear among the enemy, and they are effective against armor. For all intents and purposes, they are similar in many ways, I think, to what the battlefield assassins were and the Hashashin in Medieval 2. At least that's functionally what they're supposed to be like, I believe. Although the lack of hit points do mean that for the price point, they might be a little bit too expensive. I would say that maybe they should have 2 hit points for the price that they command, or they should be made a little bit cheaper. Either way would work, but as it stands, I don't see why you would spend 1100 florins on this unit when there are other units which are, objectively better down here. Nonetheless, an interesting unit. The Haradrim Spearmen, of course, low tier spears, similar in many ways to the Corsairs, only the Corsairs are an Umbar unit, and the Haradrim Spears are a Harad unit, so they will eventually be on separate factions. Now, unlike the Corsairs, they have a slightly lower attack, but they can do skill charm, and they have a bonus against cavalry. That's pretty significant, actually, because a lot of spears now don't have a bonus against cavalry, at least that's what it was like. Yeah, well, this unit does, but maybe that's changed since the last patch. I haven't actually checked over all of the spears. Yeah, I guess they got the bonus against cavalry back, but now the Haradrim Spears can be used as a nice cheap way of clogging up the enemy, and they will hold for a relatively long time provided they're backed up by something slightly better. They're a good unit to have in amongst elite units, just to provide a bit of a hit point sponge, as it were. And then you have the Southron Warband. These were one of my favourite Harad units in vanilla because of how effective they were for their price. They have been made a little less effective, it must be said. They are also a little cheaper, though. They're basically slightly better than the Haradrim Spears in terms of defense. They can also make shield wall, which means they are potentially a little bit harder to break down, but they are still not hugely effective as they once were. Because, even with a great number of them, you're not really going to be able to overwhelm some of the higher tier units with only an attack score of 11. And of course they are spears, which means in sort of a melee in a choke point, they are only going to be any good if you have them in formation facing the enemy. In a brawl, they're not going to be fantastic. But, spears, you know exactly what to expect from spears, especially lower tier ones. If you use them in formation, similar to pikes, they will be decently effective. But if you get them caught out of formation, they're not going to last very long, and, their relative cost is pretty cheap, but you should not be wasting units if at all possible. If I was going to get a cheap unit, though, it would certainly be either this, or Near Automata. But I would certainly get this or the Corsair Pikemen. They're pretty good in terms of in formation, facing the enemy in guard mode. They will hold for a decent amount of time. More so the pikes, it must be said, but the Southron Warband as well are pretty good in Shield Wall. Now the Corsair Warriors are where things start to pick up a little bit more. This is your first sword and shield unit, as it were. Now they're not hugely effective. They're a lower tier sword and shield unit, but they are still not bad for the price point, it must be said. You know, they are... I would suggest that the Corsair Warriors are quite similar in many ways to the Dale Swordsmen. You know, they are a decent unit to sort of fill out your army with, but they aren't going to win any prizes for being super effective. The Corsair Savages, on the other hand, are a little bit more impressive, mainly because they have a decent attack score. Now, obviously, they don't have armor at all, which is a bit of a problem for them, but they are effective against armor, like most shock infantry are, and also they can frighten nearby enemies, which is an important point. They're a good unit to send in first, particularly in a siege up on the walls, because you're going to do a decent amount of damage to them. Obviously, off the charge, they're going to do decently well as well, because a charge of 9 is not bad at all. I like the Corsair Savages. Used in conjunction with the Corsair Pikemen, then you're going to have a decent lower tier core to your army. Of course, the problem with this is both of these units are Umbar, so Harad are going to have a bit of a problem at the low tier, I think, when they're separated off, if nothing else is added. Now, the Belagir Footmen are, again, a slightly better spear than the Haradrim spears and the Southron Warband. This is an Umbar unit, of course. They're well armoured, you know, they are essentially just better in every way. They will hold the line better, and they also have a decent attack score for spears. Not a great charge, but you know exactly what to expect from spears by now. Now for the highest tier Harad, well, I say that. Yeah, not the highest tier Harad infantry, it must be said, but the dismounted Serpent Guard were always a favourite of mine in vanilla. Again, Harad were always a faction that offered good value for money, and that is still the case. Although it must be said that they do rely a little bit on Umbar's very high tier infantry now. But the dismounted Serpent Guards still offer a decent value for money, although they aren't effective against armor, which I do believe most of the sword and shield units now are not effective against armor anyway. So they have managed to claw back a bit of effectiveness relative to some of the other units. A good unit still. Not quite as good as they once were, I don't think, in terms of sort of relative terms, but still a good unit. Now moving on to the Castamir's Chosen. Now this is Harad's best sword and shield infantry at the moment, I do believe. The Trollmen of Harad are slightly different, I would count them as, but Castamir's Chosen, good defense, decent attack. All round, you know, you want your sword and shield units to be good all round units, and Castamir's Chosen is certainly that. Good place to put your general because of the very high defense. They won't win, obviously, in a battle of attrition against something like the Dwarves, but still, nonetheless, a good heavy infantry unit, which is a real theme of Umbar's higher tier units. Like the Abrazanim Naduzagar. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but this is a shock infantry unit, of course. An attack of 32 is honestly not huge. They will be outperformed by quite a few other shock infantries now. I do think that with the recent rebalancing that has undergone, some of the Haradrim high tier units have been left behind a little bit. Nonetheless, the Abrazanim will still do a decent amount of damage in melee with that 32 attack. They have a higher defense, which is interesting for a shock infantry unit. But yes, a lot of decent damage. Now, the Trollmen of Harad used to be fairly overpowered. I'm not sure if they have actually been significantly changed in terms of their stats, but they are still very effective, as you can see. I think they were made more expensive, actually, which is their rebalancing. Because 1,250 is a significant amount of money. Obviously, you can see from their stats that they are essentially... I always use the Trollmen in vanilla the same way that I use Berserkers, because I feel like that was what their intention was. But they were never quite as good. Now, though, they are as good. They are in that sort of company, and Trollmen, you can only have 2 before the cost increases significantly, but still a very powerful unit, a very powerful offensive unit, I think, despite their higher defense score. I think that they can be used very effectively up on the walls in a siege. And in a pitch battle, put them in the middle of your line and they will do a significant amount of damage to the enemy. Now the Southron Pikemen, they are slightly better, well, they have a slightly better defense score than the Corsair Pikemen, but I wouldn't say it's worth the 150 extra florins you're paying for them. Interesting. Well, again, you know, Southron Pikes, they're fairly cheap pikes, although I would say the Corsair, well, they actually have more in a unit as well. So, interesting. Southron Pikemen. Again, Pikemen, there's not really much to say about them in functional terms. It's more do they offer a good value for money? And the Southron pikemen, I would say, do, just because of their slightly higher numbers than the Corsair pikes. Again, they will be slightly better under arrow fire, but you know, you don't really want killing powerful pikes, you just want them to hold. Now, the Naru and Aru Royal Guard. High tier spear units are an interesting way to spend your money, because usually spears are not particularly good at killing, but they are good at surviving. Now, this is an excellent place to put your general for those reasons. High defense, hit points, of course. You're only going to be able to have one, though, I believe. Yep. So, you know, this is a general's bodyguard unit for all intents and purposes on foot. Now for the archers. Corsair archers, low tier archers, but missile damage of 9 is not too bad. You know what to expect from low tier archers. Haradrim archers are much the same. Essentially, I'm not sure why they would be different. Well, they've got slightly more men in the unit. But low tier archers, always a bit of a risk, because they're going to lose a skirmish battle very handily. But in a siege, potentially, pretty useful if you're on the defense, if you want to save some money. The Southron archers, again, just a step up. Missile score of 10, slightly better stats, they have slightly better attributes. We'll move on to these units in a moment, I think, but for the time being, we'll just stick with the archers. The Abrazanim Nadubawib, what a mouthful that is. Again, decent. I think they were actually nerfed. They don't have hit points anymore, which is interesting. But, you know, it's not as if Harad were short on good archers anyway. They have the Castamir's Rangers, which, you know, Ranger units tend to be a little bit more squishy in a skirmish fight, but their overall missile damage is always pretty impressive, and that's no different here. 14 is very good. But the Naru and Aru Royal Archers and the Hashari Shadows are the two very impressive archers, I believe. Now, you know, the Naru and Aru are slightly more heavily armoured, slightly better missile damage, but the Hashari Shadows have got slightly more in terms of their attributes, and also I believe they are still unbreakable, which is interesting. Very good archers. The Harad archer force is not quite on the level of like the Sylvan Elves or Dale, but they have possibly the best archer force of the evil factions, I want to say. I would have to, you know, the rebalancing has been real, but I would have to take another look at that when I do the top 10s, when the 1.0 finally comes out, whenever that may be. Now, the Muhad tribesmen have been nerfed, which is a real shame, because they were a real strong point of Harad, and it would have been something they will need, something like that, when it comes down to Harad and Umbar being separated, because Harad will be extremely underpowered when the high tier Umbar units have been stripped away from them. Interestingly enough, Umbar will be underpowered without Harad, because they will have no cavalry presence whatsoever. But we'll get onto that in a moment. The Muhad tribesmen, though, you know what to expect from a javelin unit. They are very strong against stuff like mumakil, although, you know, a Harad mirror match is somewhat likely, I suppose. You know, in a siege, you're likely to see javelins, and the Corsair Blackguards are very similar. They have a much better missile damage score now, and they are decent in melee. They don't have a lot of ammo, though, so you better be careful when using the Corsair Blackguards, because they will only have like 2 or 3 volleys before they then charge into melee. They're not bad in melee, but you really want to make sure those hits count. Now, the Harad cavalry, I believe, has lost some relative power in from vanilla. The Southron Lancers are a low-tier cavalry unit, so you know what to expect from them. As I've said many times in this video already, I should use some different words. And the Veriag Lancers are a similar story. They are slightly better in terms of stats, but, you know, where they have lost out, though, I believe, is their Serpent Guard, because the Serpent Guard used to be a very good value for money proposition. I do not believe that is the case anymore, though. You will find yourself being rolled over by the likes of the High Elves and Rohan and other factions of that ilk. Arnor is another good example, Gondor. Because the Serpent Guard doesn't have hit points, they're just not as good in melee anymore. The Serpent Bodyguard are, but you're only going to have one. So your cavalry force is going to be found extremely wanting. And really, you're still spending quite a lot on it. So I think that if Harad's infantry and ground troops stay as relatively weak as they are when the split eventually happens, their cavalry needs to be buffed, and they need to be made a more mobile faction, I think. Because this is an area where I can certainly say that their value for money from vanilla has evaporated completely. On foot, they still have some good examples of it, but not on horseback. Now, the mumakil are a somewhat different proposition because, you know, they are just essentially monsters that plow through the enemy lines. They do have a serious weakness to javelins, or any sort of thrown projectiles, and ballistae. But if the enemy has got no javelins or ballista, your mumakil are going to run through their lines basically unopposed. They may get frightened by fire arrows, but again, they'll probably get frightened whilst in the enemy lines and start running amok while in there, so it's not really the end of the world. So, you know, the mumakil, probably the strongest single unit in the game at the moment, just because of how terrifying they actually are now that the Balrog and Sauron have been removed. As for their horse archers, I have said that the Haradrim raiders in the past are not as good as their peers, and this is still the case. They are the lowest tier of horse archer, but horse archers require a lot of micro to get the most out of anyway, and I would say that how good horse archers are depends more on the player's skill than their stats, but still, it's nice to have a higher missile damage score. And then the Muhad Beastmasters are an anti-cavalry sort of javelin force. It's an interesting proposition to use, and it was something which, when used in conjunction with the Serpent Guard in vanilla, meant Harad had one of the best cavalry forces. Now though, as I've said, Harad's cavalry force just isn't really good enough to do this sort of plan anymore, so I'm not sure the Muhad Beastmasters are as useful, because while they themselves are still pretty good, they don't really have the cavalry force to back them up anymore. Nonetheless, let us pick our army, and I believe that we will have our general on foot in a Royal Guard unit. We shall also have an archer force of, what we might do that. We'll have a couple of Hashari Shadows and a couple of Naduza Wib, or Naduba Wib, whatever. So, we will have some pikemen. Wait a minute. How much of a cost increase is that? A significant one. We'll only have 4 pikemen then. And we'll have a couple of Castamir's Chosen. Ooh, we can only have one of them as well. Ooh. That's not fantastic, if I'm honest. Seeing a few big gaps in Harad here, and I haven't even tested them yet. Let's see. Belagir Footman. Let's get some Trollmen instead of the Naduzagar then. Only one Naduzagar. They don't seem strong enough to warrant only having one. You can have 3 Sindar Blade Masters for the Sylvan Elves. Although I'm pretty sure that is actually a mistake, but you should at least be allowed 2 of these guys. Because they're not strong enough to warrant only having 1. Interesting. Okay, should we have savages? No, we're not going to be attacking all that much. Excuse me. Okay, let's go for a couple of units of blackguards, and the rest have a couple of units of serpent guard. This is a real patchwork army I'm assembling. What else should I have? Well, I think we should have a couple of units of Belagir Footmen, and then we'll have, well, hang on. Let's see here. Yes, we can. This will be our army. Oh wait, you can only have 1, can you? Well, change your plan again then, and we shall go back to this. 1 unit of mumakil. Now, where shall I put my chevrons? Let's have my chevrons on the Castamir's Chosen, and on the Trollmen. Actually, let's... Can I upgrade the weapons of these guys? Yes, I can. And the armor? Yes, I can. Okay, good. Let us commence the fight. Okay, Dale seems to actually be making their advance fairly soon. Although they are actually sending up pikes first, and they are trying to send pikemen around the flank as well. Well, okay, you can attack them then. They're going to be taking extreme casualties on the approach, which is fine by me. I'm shooting the back of my own men, but whatever. I'm doing more damage to the enemy, and that's what counts. You know what? You're not hitting shit, so... You guys get ready. Man, that target is too good to pass up. Get over there. Dale force is not going to get very far against my pike line, I don't think. And even if they do, I have... Oh, I suppose I could flank around. Well, whatever. Battle is met, and they are sending in their pikes first, which is not a bad idea. Ooh. I managed to break my formation relatively fast. Okay, fuck that. Now you die. Look, could you not engage them piecemeal and get in there? Jesus, they are fucking getting through my line far, far, far too quickly. But you know what? I'm gonna have to bring my mumakil back up here. Wow, my pikes have been fucking buckled. What on earth are these guys doing? Well, actually, that's not a bad idea. Fuck. The AI is supposed to be stupid and just charge you head on. Right, fuck this. The time has come to show no mercy with the mumakil. They have fucking butchered my pikes. Did you not get caught on Hearth Watchman? Jesus. What's going on here? Okay, this should cause a lot of them to break, to be fair. They don't really have much of an answer to... You can kill them. Come on, mumakil. Best unit in the game. What on earth are they trying to do? I mean, I get that they're trying to force their way through the pikes, and it is sadly working. That pike formation was weak, guys. They folded like wet tissue paper in places. Look at that, 55. They were in formation, and it's not as even as if Dale's swordsmen are the best unit. That is highly disappointing. Let's deal with these guys. Come on. Kill them all. Well, that's a huge rout. That might even be their entire army. Yes, mumakil. What on earth are you doing? Well, they are wavering. Where's Rohan? Wait a moment. There's a unit of pikemen. No. There goes the enemy general. He seems more an ostrich. I wonder where they got the lines for the Arab announcer in Medieval 2, because he comes out with some weird things. There are still some of them. Right, okay, let's see how many of these guys we can plow into. My blackguards are firing their javelins. At what, exactly? Oh no, I was looking at the wrong thing. Man, I am out of it today. Okay. This is perfect. This is going to be carnage if I can manage to get through this area. There are some Marshals of the Red in there who are pretty decent, but they aren't going to be sufficient to take on the mumakil, I don't think. Here we go. Forwards. Oof. Oh my. Well, that's just unfortunate. Rohan Spearmen, Marshals of the Red, Yawling Swordsmen are in there. There's some Arid Lancers. None of them are going to be particularly effective against something like this. Rohan do have a lot of Javelin units though, so I actually wouldn't recommend mumakil against Rohan most of the time. This though is very bad for them. They are performing rather poorly. Actually, the Arid Lancers are pretty... Oh, Marshals of the Red. Get into them. Right, and now, go back up the hill. Back the other way. Charge through. Actually, we will send you guys in as well. What are these guys doing? Where are my mumakil? Ah, there they are. Well, you can scarcely miss them. This is what I love about the mumakil. That's just brutal. I wonder how many kills they are actually going to have. Oh, they are... Oh god, that's my javelins. Nope. Stay away from them. Pursue them. Their army is going to break relatively quickly without their general, I feel. Especially when faced with this. As I say though, ballistae and javelins will stop mumakil, so they aren't actually as overpowered as it seems. I just made it so that the enemy didn't really have anything to counter it. But they are very much defeatable. Despite the destruction that you are witnessing, they aren't as overpowered as it may seem. Bloody hell. Most of them do get back up, although it's really ill-advised to do that. Marshals of the Red are... Wow, they took huge damage from the javelins. It's a decent amount of damage the Black Guards can do now. We're up to a silver chevron on my mumakil. It's not even as if they require clever micro, you just sort of plough them through the enemy infantry. Oh, that might be them breaking completely. Or is that Dale? It's hard to tell. There's only one unit of Castamirs chosen running after the Daleman, I think. Oh, there's some Serpent Guard as well. Yawling Militia are not going to do this job. Are there any more that haven't broken? No, balance of power is in my favour completely, so I assume they have actually broken entirely. It's hard to tell. Have they all? I'm crying out loud. It's hard to tell whether it's just a delay or not. What's going on over here? Lake Town Pikes, they're all routing. The fear is real. My pikes performed exceptionally poorly. The mumakil, of course, won me that with relative ease, but yeah, I would say Harad have got some gaps at the moment. Despite the fact that they and Umbar are together, they still have some gaps, and I think that in the event that they are split soon, both factions individually will need things. I think the Harad units as a whole need a straight up buff, other than the mumakil, of course. And Umbar just need more units. They have some decent array of units on foot, which is fine, but they have no cavalry of their own. I know that the idea behind Umbar is to have sort of a high quality foot contingent, and I think that's fine, but they do need some sort of cavalry, otherwise they're just going to become sort of a slightly worse version of the dwarves. But as for Harad themselves, I think that their infantry corps is not really strong enough, and I think that they need slightly stronger cavalry as well, because I think Harad need that as more of a focus than the infantry. They just need to be made a bit more tanky, which I know is ironic considering the mumakil, but the mumakil are kind of a one-time thing. Like, they aren't going to be useful in every situation because javelins and ballistae basically blunt them entirely. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Harad. I think that the recent patches have defanged them, rather, because they were actually one of the strongest factions not so long ago. Hopefully they will be again, because I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Harad. Okay, so that was Harad, and I know that the demonstration wasn't really all that informative because I used mumakil against units that really didn't stand a chance against them, but it is just meant to be an example of what you can do with Harad. And next I think we'll do Dale. Probably go back to the good factions, and I think Dale will be a good one to take a look at because they are, you know, they're a little bit different from what they were in vanilla. They still have an archer focus, but they have a few other units which make them somewhat different to play than what they were in vanilla. So I think we'll do them next, and I hope to see you there for it.